I call to order the November 18th, 2019 regular meeting of the Board of Selectmen. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item is approval of minutes of November 4th, 2019 regular meeting. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move we approve the minutes of the November 4th, 2019 regular meeting as submitted, except spelling Brett with 2 T's.
Brett with 2 T's. Very good.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor of approval as amended? Thank you. It's now past the hour of 7 p.m. We have a public hearing with the Board of Assessors for the purpose of discussing the valuation of each class of property, the minimum residential factor, and the allocation of the tax burden among the 4 classes of real property: residential, open space, commercial, industrial, and of personal property. And we will begin with John Codere, Town Administrator.
So, thank you. This evening, is it working? So you need a finance director to get this technology stuff working for us. So actually, that's a good place to start. I want to recognize the financial team that's here with us tonight. Jason Little, the finance director, Dan Brogy, our principal assessor. You're going to hear from him later. And Amy Haley, our treasurer collector. So as you know, everything that we do related to the town's finances is a team approach, literally, and so everybody here was involved in the data that we're about to go through tonight, as well as the presentation. So why don't we start with the purpose of this evening. So this is a required public hearing by Mass General Law. This is your annual tax classification hearing. And so in terms of this evening, we're going to do a little bit of background, and I know this is old hat for most of you, but again, we have folks in the audience and we have folks at home that may be watching. We're going to go through very briefly what is tax classification. I like to use this as an opportunity to give the board a bit of an update in terms of where we stand with economic development and new growth in town. Each year when we set the tax rate, it's a snapshot and a chance to talk about what's happening in terms of economic development in the community. Because keep in mind, 80% of our budget, so 80% of everything that we base our operations on comes from local taxes. And so understanding what your tax base is doing is very, very important to what the Board of Selectmen as well as the financial boards and committees need to do. We try to interpret any trends that we're seeing for you. And then I will turn over, so I'm going to handle the beginning of the presentation. Then I'm going to hand it over to Dan Brogy to go through the legally required classification components that the board has to, at the end of the meeting, actually take a formal vote on. So let's start with what is tax classification. So tax classification is a formal process whereby the Board of Selectmen makes a policy decision to shift the tax burden from one property class, residential, commercial, industrial, open space, so shifting the tax burden from one class to another. Now, I know I've told you this in the past, but really tax classification came into being as a formal process following Prop 2.5, 1979, 1980. Prior to that, crackerjack assessors used to manipulate the data to effectively shift the tax burden. With Prop 2.5 coming into play, your tax rate needs to be approved by the state, and so they look at your values to make sure that you are, in fact, valuing the different classes at the full market value. And so part of that process is, listen, if you want to, as a policy decision, shift some of that tax burden, you can do it, but you have to be above board and explicit about what you're doing and vote on it at a public hearing. Few key concepts. By shifting the tax burden typically from the residential taxpayer to the commercial industrial is the way it goes. It's important to note that it doesn't actually create any additional tax dollars. You're just shifting the burden from one class to another. As I said, it's a policy decision. It doesn't have to pass any logic test. It's just a policy decision, and some communities do it, and the vast majority do not. I always like to point out that since 1979, Northborough has not voted to artificially shift the tax burden. I think fundamentally for the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Assessors, and certainly the IDC, and I know we have Kara Chapman, the Executive Director of the Quarter 9 Chamber. The businesses have very strongly and consistently voiced that it's an issue of fairness. And for us, in terms of economic development, sustainability. One of the things we pride ourselves on, we've had just exceptional economic growth over the last 10 years, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. But one of the things that we're able to do when we meet with businesses is we tell them, you come in, these are the rules. Once you're in here, we don't then change the rules and artificially shift or increase taxes on you. And the concept here is that long-term sustainability means treating everybody fairly and businesses knowing what to expect when they come into town and what they can expect years later down the road. So in terms of new growth, we've got some very good news. The fiscal 20 new growth was certified at $44.8 million. That's better new growth than we've seen over the last few years. And a big factor of that has to do with some of the economic development I'm sure you've seen occurring down on Bartlett Street. We have 4 buildings that are either constructed or in the process of being constructed, totaling roughly 1 million square feet. Now that's a lot of space. Just to put it into perspective, the mall is about 660,000 square feet, the upper section. So there's quite a bit of development happening out on Bartlett, and that has helped us in this new growth. So what we saw in the last 5 years was a tailing off of new growth, and it happens cyclically. You'll have a significant development like the mall in Avalon Bay, and then, or buildings built on spec, and then as the local economy absorbs those, new growth will taper off, and then it bounces around a little bit. But we look at always what's trending, what are we seeing more long term, and we're going to talk about that. But overall, residential values are up 3.8%, single-family homes up about 3.2%, and condos are up 4.9%, so that's a blended. So what we're seeing is the smaller homes and condominiums as a way to break into the home ownership market. There's a lot of demand for those. The multi-million-dollar houses, they will sell, but they're not quite as hot as people trying to get into a fairly average or median value home. Commercial values are up, and industrial values are up quite a bit, 8.8%. Now keep in mind, that's not just a value. That's not I own an industrial building, and that building is now valued at 8.8% more. That's a blended percentage of the value of the market increase, but also just new industrial development, which is primarily happening out on Bartlett Street, which we just talked about. Now the key here, overall, the net effect is that the value of the town has increased to just over $3 billion. Now, that's very important because, as I pointed out in previous presentations, the overall value of the town doesn't always go in one direction. And so it's a combination of what's happening with the market as well as what are we seeing for development. And those two factors play into the overall value of the town. But in general, this continues to remain a very positive trend for the town of Northborough. Overall, we're about 75-25. 75% of our valuation is residential, and roughly 25% is commercial, industrial. Now that's a pretty good mix for us. I believe that we've hit basically equilibrium at this point. So if you go back to the early 2000s, we were 80-20, 80% residential, roughly 20% commercial industrial. But what we've seen is, particularly in the past 10 years, significant commercial and industrial development. So as these vacant parcels of land get developed, they come onto the rolls and are reflected in these numbers. But you can see going back 2016 to 20, it's bouncing around 74.9, 75, 74.7. That just has to do with the values at any given time, as well as new development coming onto the tax rolls. But basically, As we approach build-out in the town of Northborough, you're going to see us kind of settling in at that 75-25. So it's a good place for us to be. It means that we have, in the last 10 years, seen a real shift of the tax burden naturally occurring, not through a policy decision, but shifting from being borne by the residential taxpayer to increasingly a commercial industrial, from 80 to, down to 75, or from 20 to 25 up for the commercial industrial. So that's a good trend, but my suspicion is as we look forward in the future, you're going to see that pretty much has reached an equilibrium. So in terms of the fiscal 20 new growth, the 44.8 million is broken up in the different categories. And the one area we're not seeing a lot of new growth in is residential. So residential is at $10.4 million. We have 6 new homes in Northborough, 2 new condominiums. I don't mean condominium complexes, I mean like a duplex condominium kind of a setup. So 8. And then the rest of that $10 million number is made up of kitchen remodels, decks, additions, things that people have done to existing residential properties. So for us, a big residential development is a dozen houses. There's not a lot of land. There's certainly no large tracts of residential land available for large subdivisions. There's always a possibility of a high-density development of some kind, apartment complex or condominium, but there's a whole process for that. And but in terms of just single-family homes, we're not seeing a lot of action. So probably 2 that you can think of right off the bat are on the corner of Lincoln and 20, where the old red house was torn down. Commercial, not much going on there. We have sort of absorbed the last of the second phase of the mall project up near Northborough Crossing. So we're seeing some tenant fit outs and leases up there, so that's contributed a little bit, but commercial side of things are pretty flat. Industrial is doing well, 10.4. That is primarily, again, the development that you're seeing down on Bartlett Street. 301 Bartlett Street, a very large warehouse or transportation hub that was just put in. That's the large contributing factor to that figure. So altogether, total real estate growth is around 21.8 million. And then, last but not least, we always have this conversation about personal property. Personal property is not the same as real estate. If you come in and you build a new a factory, a warehouse, an office building, that will be there next year, and more than likely, in the long run, it will appreciate in value. It's the difference between your home and your car. Personal property is like your car. It depreciates. So although we have $23 million in personal property in this new growth number, the net effect is we've depreciated about $13 million, if I'm not mistaken, in personal property, because it's things that decline in value, like your vehicle. It's office equipment, racking systems, computers, things of that nature. So we really only added $7 million when you actually net off what's depreciated. And the reason I always take the time each year to talk about personal property is this whole concept of new growth. New growth is a factor that's used for calculating your levy capacity for purposes of Prop 2.5. It's an arbitrary number, 2.5, and it's an arbitrary process for what counts and what doesn't count. For purposes of calculating our levy capacity, personal property matters. So it does matter. But when you sit here and you look at, well, what's really happening in terms of the permanent real growth of the town of Northborough, that personal property figure is not one that I get excited about. And when I see that making up the majority of our new growth, that's reason to pause, and it's reason to take note of it, because that's not sustainable growth that is going to be there next year. That will depreciate. That's, again, like your vehicle. Buy a house 10 years later, you're usually better off in terms of appreciation. Buy a car 10 years later, what happens? You're looking for a new car because that one is worth $500, right? So, at least the cars I drive. So overall, though, this is good news. We're continuing to see, good new growth, and certainly in terms of trend, we have, we were looking at declining new growth here for several years. And again, this is significant development. So this is Avalon Bay, this mustard in here. Northborough Crossing is this beige color. And then this is phase 2 of the mall. And then see this gray here, that's the industrial, that's Bartlett Street. So you start to see the components, and you can see, look at how much, residential was really the new growth going back there. And then you've got, commercial and industrial, but you start looking, look at this is personal property, this top, I don't know, it's sort of a greenish color. So it's important to know what's making up your new growth, because it's important to know what you're going to be able to count on in the future versus what is a little bit more fleeting. And so if you look at if you look at fiscal 20 here, it's certainly a higher level of new growth than we've seen in recent years. This was about 36 million last year, and this again is just under $45 million. Big chunk personal property, but this is what's driving it right here, is that industrial development. So when we start talking about the town's future, and we will be meeting on December 12th, here's a plug for the financial trend monitoring presentation on December 12th. When we start looking at sustainability and projections out 5 years, what's happening to your tax base in terms of real growth is absolutely critical to knowing what kind of resources we're going to have at our disposal to sustain the services that we've come to count on and to enjoy. But so if you look down here, the 5-year average for new growth is 37.5 million. The 15-year average is 52.3. And I'm sure Tim will comment on this because he's a data guy. When you look at these data points, if you just take averages without really understanding what's behind these numbers, you will get yourself in a lot of trouble, because this development we will never, ever see again. Why do I say that with such confidence? Because we don't have the land for that kind of development, or we're running out of the land for that kind of development. It's possible you could see a redevelopment somewhere, but that's not going to replicate itself. That's not a sustainable trend that we're going to see. So you see that gets absorbed, new growth drops down. Now we're seeing this next, and I don't want to say it's the final phase, but we are certainly entering the final phases of significant economic development for the town of Northborough. So originally I was going to spend a little bit more time at this meeting talking about the economic development in those areas in terms of where we're going. We thought better of it, and I think we need to do a deeper dive on this at the financial trend monitoring. And I want to have some time to put some slides together for you on those areas in town where we are counting on for our economic development. And so if you look at, this is a zoning map of the town of Northborough. This big pink area here and this pink area here, those were the two, when I started working for the town 16 years ago, they were undeveloped. And we talked about, this is our future. This is our future tax base. This is our economic development that will come. These are industrial zoned areas, and that's going to support the residential, tax impact. Well, down in this corner here is the mall, 650,000 square feet. Then there's phase 2 of the mall. And then over in here is Kimball Sand and Gravel. It's about a 50-acre parcel that is available for development when they complete their mining operations. That's the last significant contiguous industrially zoned parcel that's available for development. When you come up into here, this looks like a big area, doesn't it? But it's not. This whole bottom third here is Sudbury Valley Trustees Conservation Land. This is the state hospital land. Up here is land that goes with the regional high school. So really, all that is to be developed in here is sort of this middle third. And that middle third right now is either developed, being built right now, or permitted to be built in the next year to year and a half. So when you look at our future economic development and our growth in terms of our tax base, this is done. That's done. There's a couple small parcels that they might carve out for a small development, but you're not gonna see 1,000,000 square feet, 300,000 square feet, those types of developments. Down here, this is all built out now. There's 2 pads near the ball fields in the front of it that could, originally were held aside for restaurants, but we all know that's been a difficult area for development lately. And then you have Kimball Sand and Gravel, 50 acres. Other than that, you know, you've got these areas that could get redeveloped, but this stuff's all developed already. So the town is maturing, okay? And I say this when I talk about organizations, you know, are you a startup? Are you a growth community? Are you a declining community? Are you we're still growing, but we're at the nearing the top of that growth curve, and we're gonna plateau. And that has implications for our services, for staffing, for everything that we do, because we need to stop thinking that we're going to see 50, 60, $70 million in new growth that's going to continue to fuel expansion of services, and start thinking that this is sort of getting close to equilibrium, and we're going to talk more about sustaining the services that we have. Doesn't mean there won't be growth, and doesn't mean you won't be able to augment your services, because you're always going to be responding to the natural increases or declines or economic variations and all that, and we should be healthy to do that. But you're not going to see $92 million of new growth popping in anytime soon. I guess you could potentially, if, you know, Kimball Sand and Gravel were to complete and something were to go there, you could see something like that. But those are going to be less frequent. And so if I go back to this chart here and I shake the snow globe to say, well, what does Dan Brogy, our principal assessor, think? I'll blame him, because if it doesn't come to fruition, it's his fault. I'm just kidding. So we're you know, 45 million. So one of the buildings down on Bartlett is done. A couple are in construction, and they're permitted, and they've begun construction. Then they need to get leased. They need to get you know, fitted out. So what we're probably looking at, so we're in 20 here. So fiscal 21 and 22, we should be pretty good with our new growth. We're probably looking at something, you know, between $30 and $50 million. So you're going to see something ranging similar to this. Again, it depends on, you know, things that we don't control. But as that Bartlett Street area, you know, this section right here finishes its development, you know, we're going to see, you know, this year and maybe 2 more years before we pick up that new growth. After that, we're probably looking more like this, 30 million or less. And that will become the new norm. That doesn't mean, you know, something can happen. You know, always an existing parcel could get redeveloped. Someone can buy it and put a biotech in. That stuff will happen. But it'll be the differential between whatever is existing on that developed parcel already and the new use. It won't be raw land to, whoa, lo and behold, we've got, you know, $25 million development on there. So it'll be more of a sustaining sort of an approach. And as with our budgets, more of a sustaining kind of a budget approach. So we're going to talk a little bit more and give you a little more information on that at our December 12th financial trend monitoring, because I think it's really important, and it's important to sort of see graphically what's left to be developed, because there's been so much that's occurred in this town over the last 10 years. This chart used to be our top, I used to say top 10 taxpayers. As you know, we expanded it to our top 15 because people were concerned that they thought that some of the businesses at the bottom had left the town. The reality is we've just added more and better and larger development towards the top, and so the list just got longer. But we haven't lost these companies at the bottom. So we went from our top 10 to our top 15. And a perfect example is our, you know, last year the number 15 was A. Dewey Pile out on Bartlett Street. That just got replaced by 301 Bartlett Street, coming in at an assessed value for 2020 at just over $10 million and $173,000 in new tax revenue. So that's the first of 4 buildings of various sizes, but I think you're going to see potentially a couple more come in and shake down this list a little bit. But again, anything that falls off this list is not going away. We have been very good about sustaining. Now, the other thing I want you to know about this list and why it is such a tremendously powerful place for the town of Northborough to be in is that in this we have retail, we have biotech, we have healthcare, we've got telecom and IT companies, we've got nursing and rehab, and we have transportation hubs. And so really when you look at this, what we have is what everybody strives for. Think about your own investment portfolio, right? If it's all one company, all your eggs in one basket, we have great diversification. And so our tax base isn't relying on any single taxpayer who may at some time go under. So our largest taxpayer is up at the top here, Northborough Crossing. Again, that's retail, but again, the whole mall isn't likely to go under, but you might have a retailer that struggles. We've seen a lot of that lately. But there's diversification even within that large taxpayer. But the rest of these, I think the most important thing to note out of here, besides the diversification, is the fact that 10 of these 15 companies that are listed in our top 15 taxpayers have either located in Northborough or expanded in Northborough in the last 10 years or so. So we have, our success story is our economic development. And the beneficiaries of this economic development are the residential taxpayers. Because naturally through this development, the tax burden has shifted from 80-20 to 75-25, where it will hopefully remain. So again, this is a success story for us, and a big part of it is just having a clear understanding of what your goals are in terms of economic development. We want a long-term partnership. We don't do gimmicks with tax breaks to get a company in, and then as soon as the TIF runs out in 5 to 10 years, their taxes double. We want companies to come locate here. We have great location, right? You can't manufacture the location. We've got a fair tax structure for businesses, and this is where we want to be. We've got a highly educated workforce in this region, lots of higher education, and for all those reasons, you're seeing, biotech companies, some real high-paying tech jobs locating in this area. So that's a great story for Northborough. But it comes with a caution, and the caution is that as we start to approach this build-out, you're not going to see a lot of new growth on raw land. So let's get to the slide that everybody is really anticipating talking about. This is the final fiscal 2020 tax impact. And the first thing to point out is that when we met with you, the Board of Selectmen, as well as the financial boards and committees in preparation for last year's town meeting, we did projections, and we do them typically in December as part of the financial trend monitoring. That initial projection was a tax impact of $361, and it always comes with a caveat and a disclaimer, and that is that assumes that we don't know what the market is going to do necessarily. We assume a 3% increase in residential property values, but we also don't know what's going to happen in terms of new growth. So if we get more new growth or we get more state aid than we forecast, that has the effect of lowering the tax impact. And that's exactly what you're seeing here. $59 based on market adjustments and primarily growth, actual physical development, and most of it down on Bartlett Street. We did get, I think, about $33,000 in additional state aid, and we reduced our overlay account by about $22,000 roughly. So the net effect of all of this is the tax impact is $294. So that is good news. So that's good news. The tax impact is less than we all agreed on at the start of this budget process. And again, it's based on a very good, positive economic development. In terms of trends and the local tax bills, I think it's important to look at this trend, because if you look from fiscal 11 to fiscal 14, and you see these very low tax increases, in one case it was actually a decrease in 2011 of $20. And then you see a very clear difference starting in 15 going through the present. Well, in this time frame back here, we had a number of things that were going on. In 2010 and 2011, we saw the largest economic development in the town's history, right? Avalon Bay and the mall. So those are that new growth came in. But we also had in here was the effect of the recession. So we had a very good perfect storm, but in a good way, of factors that helped keep the taxes low in Northborough. We had, because of the recession, single-family home values were going down. Now, normally when that happens, it means your rate is just going to go up, right? Because you still need to generate the same amount of revenues to operate on. But what we had was we had significant economic development that sort of backfilled that. So during the worst recession, when single-family home values were going down, we had this significant economic development. And so because we didn't tax to the max of Prop 2.5, we created levy capacity during these years, and we're able to hold the taxes down for folks during that difficult economic period. The factors that played into this are not factors that are going to replicate again. And they're also not factors that are sustainable. The town of Northborough and its school system cannot survive on a $50 tax increase. So on average, we need about 3.5% increase in our budgets, the town, general government, and the schools, to sustain the level of services that people have come to expect and appreciate. So that requires, again, typically about a $300 increase in the average single-family home bill. But coming from 15 through 20 here, there's a couple things that happened. So in 16 and 17, these two data points, that's a Lincoln Street school. We took on just under $15 million of new debt. So that debt exclusion is included in there. In fiscal 19, what happened in 19, Jason? Refresh my memory. Oh, I know. In 19 and 20, these two here, why we were originally thinking 361, that's the high school assessment that came into play. So if you remember, we have shifting enrollments at our regional high school that we share with Southborough. Northborough's enrollment is going up and Southborough's enrollment is going down. We have had rather extraordinary increases in our high school assessment. 9% in fiscal 19, whoops, sorry. 9% in fiscal 19, that 331, and what was going to be $361 in fiscal 20 was an 8.3% increase. Now, our other budgets are going up a little over 3%. That high school assessment, even though the high school budget was only going up 3%, our assessment was going up significant. And that has a number of implications for us. One, it drives the tax bills up, right? Because you have to pay for it. But the other is that in order to pay for it, we've accessed our levy capacity. So we had $2.9 million in levy capacity. That levy capacity now is down to about $2.16 million because of these 2 years of extraordinary assessments for high school. So we have to, and we'll talk about this more in December, is what's happening with our levy capacity, because once you get to the end and you're taxing to the max of Prop 2.5, if you run into a situation where you have shifting enrollments through no fault of the school administration and you don't have levy capacity, what do you have to do? Override. Exactly. That's the only way, or you cut services significantly. And again, the high school budget isn't going up dramatically. It's just a natural shifting because of the enrollment. So we've been lucky that we've had the levy capacity to deal with that. The result is, though, you're seeing it pushing up on the average tax impact. So we've approved projects like Lincoln Street. We've had our assessments jump at the high school, again, through no fault of the school administration, but that's just the demographic bubble that's pushing its way through. And by the way, we're looking at these projections, and we believe, hopefully beginning next year, it should flatten out or even possibly reverse, because it's based on a large, group of kids that are kind of making their way through. They're in the 10th grade now, if I'm not mistaken. So that can always shift. But the other thing is it has a lot to do with the number of kids in Southborough who are choosing to go to a private school instead of coming into the public schools. So even when you're looking at the demographics and you're following it, there's a bleed rate of kids that don't make the jump from 8th grade to 9th grade to the high school because they go to St. John's or some other private school. And so when the economy's good, we see that happen more often. During the recession, that's the other thing that helped us back here. During this period of time, our high school assessment was almost flat. It was like 1%, 2%, because Southborough's enrollment was going up at that time. So again, if I had to choose when to take these things, I would have taken the lower assessments during the recession, because I think that helped out the taxpayers in Northborough during a very difficult economic time. But now we're seeing the other side of it here, where things are kind of shifting back. So this chart brings everything together, because I know we've talked about a lot about different variables. So there's the different categories of property: residential, open space, commercial, industrial, and personal property. We talk about what's the tax rate doing, and the other thing is the average single-family home value. So last year, the average single-family home went up about 6%. This year, it's going up only about 3.2%. So it's a little over $14,000 the single-family home has gone up from fiscal 19 to fiscal 20. And so the average single-family tax bill from 19 to 20 is going up about 3.8%. But when you look at all the variables, I like this table because it brings everything together in one place. So you can see the trends in the residential property values as well as the commercial industrial. People always say, well, you can see your tax rate, and you'll see this article happen in communities. The tax rate goes down. That's great, the tax rate went down, but usually because the values are up. What do people care about? They want to know what's happening to their tax bill. And so there are multiple variables that are in motion, and it's how they all interplay. So what are the different values of properties doing relative to each other? Determines what the tax rate's going to do, what the single-family home value is doing. But this is basically everything together in one slide. And again, I'm very pleased to be standing here to tell you that it is favorable compared to what we've already approved and discussed. So in terms of my portion of the presentation, I'm going to wrap up with some key summary points. And the first is that I just want to make sure everybody understands that our home values, the total valuation for the town, not just the homes, but everything, is up over $132 million. So that isn't a given. Towns' overall values do not necessarily always go up. For us, it's the market fluctuations, right? But also the new growth, the real new growth, the buildings that are going in the ground that we're being able to capture for future tax base. But that's a positive trend, and it has been positive throughout the entire recessionary period right up until today. New growth is strong. We anticipate the next 2 years being relatively solid new growth, assuming that these developments that are underway continue to come to fruition. And really the big thing for us is that when we look at our tax base, particularly our commercial industrial, it's very diversified. We aren't beholden to 3M, who might just leave, or a couple years ago, a neighboring community lost a rather significant taxpayer, and it left a mark, and they had to maneuver to manage that. We have large taxpayers, but they're very diverse, and so if something bad happens in the economy, it's less likely to impact all of these large taxpayers. It might hit one segment of the economy harder than others, but that diversification is good for us. It means that we're stable today, and since we're kind of reaching that build-out equilibrium, that remains, as I look forward, relatively stable. That's all positive news for the town of Northborough. And I want to end on a really high note here, and that is that the tax impact of the average single family home, it remains affordable. And I want to just remind people that the Board of Selectmen, financial planning, appropriations. We all had very lengthy discussions about realistically, and again, we want to be realistic when we do projections, that we were looking at a $361 tax impact, largely because of the Algonquin assessment, okay? That his assessment wasn't up out of the gate, that would have been lower. But that's what we thought we were going to do. And here we are today, and we're looking at something that's $69 or $67 less. So everybody approved this, town meeting approved it in full view of these facts. And now when it comes time to set the tax rate, I'm pleased to say that it's even better news than we had unanimously approved in terms of the boards and committees. So that's good news. So again, like most things in life, you know, it's not all happy, cheery news. It's not all doom and gloom. It's a mixed bag. And at the moment, we're in very good shape. In the immediate future, this fiscal year, the next couple fiscal years, I think we're pretty stable and we're in decent shape. But we need to, as a backdrop, when we start making decisions about things that are going to have implications for our budgets 5, 10 years from now, that's the backdrop. That, you know, we're reaching and we're approaching build out, and you're going to start seeing less new growth, and we're going to be more about sustaining the services that we have and stabilizing our tax impacts moving forward. And again, maintaining a single tax rate and maintaining a good economic climate and condition for businesses that are here, I hope that we can continue to maintain that trend of, again, our top 15 taxpayers, 10 of them either located here or expanded in the last 10 years. That's a great track record, and I think if we can continue to do that, and our long-term success and stabilization in terms of our budgeting and our ability to continue to maintain our services is looking very positive. So I'll leave it to the chair if anybody has any questions about the slides I covered before I turn it over to my friend Dan Brogy to go through the classification options.
Yes. Yeah, just a couple quick comments on this. Thank you, John, very much for this illuminating presentation. I just would like to also add that a lot of the success over the last 10 years has been in part due to the strong management in the town to, in the earlier years, maneuver through the recession to stockpile levy capacity, if you will, that can sustain us in these later years when we need to draw upon it with these additional costs that we faced. Also, you made reference to the Lincoln Street School project and the largest bond issuance that the town has ever made. Leading into that, it's that strong management and strong financial leadership put us in a position to get the best bond rating the town has ever enjoyed, and in consequence with that, saving money on the bond issuances by being able to secure a much lower interest rate than might have been the case otherwise. So there's a lot of very sound financial management taking place here, and I don't want to undersell that aspect of it too when you look back over how we've been able to navigate this last decade. So thank you very much. Appreciate it, team. Appreciate all your help in doing this. So.
And I would add to that, Jason, the consistency and the guiding hand of the financial boards and committees and the long-term members specifically who have that perspective in the background, who have been through that recession, understand why we have the policies and why we do the things that we do. You know, I talk about budgets all the time and budget analysis and trend monitoring. I mean, I like this stuff, and I enjoy working with it, but it's not in and of itself meaningful. It's how those budgets translate into our ability to build a school, to put roofs, to take care of our roads, to deliver the services that we do. And that's what budgeting is about. It's a means to an end. The end is in the services. And so when you hear me talking about budgets and policies and consistently talking about trend analysis and things of that nature, it's not some abstract thing that's off. It translates into every single thing that we do that you care about as a board member and the residents care about as a taxpayer. And so that partnership is very important, and that consistency and understanding of the board and committee members, that guiding consistent hand is absolutely critical for the staff to be able to do the important things that we do. Because if our boards become unstable and we start focusing on things that aren't important or as important as some of this stuff, we're not going to be able to sustain the services, or it's going to be a lot more difficult. And so by your boards and committees being so consistent, it allows the financial team to focus on the real value-added things that we do. And I can't say enough about that. That's probably, in my opinion, as a manager, the best thing about this community is the consistency of the boards and committees and their long-term perspectives and the depth of their understanding of these issues. That's what's allowed us to be, to a large part, be successful at what we do. But I appreciate those comments.
Thank you, John. Any questions on this material so far by members of the board? Nothing at the
All right,
moment?
so now we're going to get to the meat of what you're here to do. I'm going to hand it over to Dan Brogy, Principal Assessor, and he's going to run you through the classification options, which you are legally mandated to listen to and then vote on. So, no, we can't skip this. We're going to have to go through it. How's that for a build-up, Dan?
So as John had mentioned, 3 items you'll be voting on tonight, or deciding on, one of them being the classification itself, or essentially shifting the tax rate between the residential and the commercial class. Also the residential exemption and the small commercial exemption. So I will go through the 3 items and certainly try to answer any questions if I can when we're done here. So again, the first thing, and the main thing generally for most communities, whether or not to adopt classification itself. This does allow a community, any municipality, to essentially split the tax rate between the residential class and the commercial class, having the commercial industrial base pick up a disproportionate share of the burden. So for purposes of illustration here, you can see on the top there we put the average single-family home, condominiums, industrial properties, and so on. If we maintain a single tax rate, do not adopt classification, you see a proposed rate there of $17.25 and the math across to come up with the bills. To illustrate, if we even adopt a small shift, in this case a 5% shift, you see those same values, and you can see in the next column on the tax rate, you can see the residential rate go down a little bit, but to make up for that, the commercial the commercial rate goes up. Again, we're raising the same amount of money. It's just who's going to pay. So to give that, say, average single-family tax bill a break, artificially lowering that burden, you make it up with the commercial industrial taxpayer, and you have to think about if that's really what you want to do here. So again, and you can shift this right along. That illustrates a small shift. You can go up from there, but again, it's the message maybe that you want to send here, whether or not you really want to do that. We've never adopted this. Certainly the board's not going to recommend this tonight, and we hope to certainly remain competitive and continue to attract economic development in the future. So with that, I'll move on to the next item. This really isn't relevant to Northborough, actually most communities. There are only about 14 or 15 communities in the state that have adopted this, and I know of one that actually got rid of it. The residential exemption, again, no more money's being raised, it's just who's going to pay. It has no bearing on the commercial industrial base. It simply shifts the burden within the residential class. So what it does is it allows you to apply an exemption based on the average residential value, not the average single-family value, but the average residential value. Come up with an amount, whatever you want to be. In this case, for the illustration here, we do a 10% value to illustrate this. And as you can see on the left, we've got some values, lower valued homes, 350, the average single-family home, and then someone with a higher valued home. And you can see under a single rate scenario what their tax bill is. Now, if you apply a residential exemption, in this case we did 10% for this year based on this year's numbers, you can see the net effect. It lowers that person's taxable value. You say, well, how are we going to make up for all that lost value? I'm going to raise the rate. The rate's going to go from 17.25 to 8, a big increase in the rate. So what it does do is it does give the lower valued home a break. In this case, you can see a $224 break on a $350,000 assessment. Not too much. On the average single-family home, it's almost a wash. But people at the higher end essentially subsidize that break at the lower end, more than more than do that. So again, you're shifting the burden within the residential class. Has no bearing on the commercial taxpayer. This is just who's paying what within the residential class. There is a break even, and I put it in there every year. You can see it. It's $479,000. Anyone with a value over that starts essentially paying a surcharge to make up for the loss in value at the low end. The big thing to note here is the reason why not many communities adopt this is the fact that it's for primary residents, which most communities are. Where it's generally adopted is the Cape and Islands. Provincetown has it, Barnstable has it, Nantucket has it, and then some of the largest cities, Boston, Cambridge, I think Everett, places like that have it, okay? Because they have a lot of apartments and multifamily homes, and it's only for primary residents. So although I don't agree with it, I guess it makes more sense there. So it really doesn't apply to most communities, and that's why, like I said, I think there are 14 or 15 statewide that actually have this, all right? So something to think about, but again, we don't feel it really applies here, and really doesn't seem fair. So the final item that you'll be asked to vote on tonight is the small commercial exemption. Here again, same amount of money is going to get raised. This is just within the commercial industrial base. And what it will do, properties under $1 million could get an exemption off their assessment at the expense of people with a building over $1 million. So it's not just, say, Northborough Crossing. It's anyone who's got a building out here on Main Street, a small building. If they're over $1 million, the rate would have to go up for them to give that small number of properties an exemption, essentially. So it would save some people a little bit of money, but it's going to be passed on. Has no bearing on the residential taxpayer this time. It's just within the commercial industrial class who's going to pay. So again, it's really, to me, to us, it's an issue of tax equity fairness. So the other thing to note, if you own the small, it may or may not benefit the business itself. If you're a tenant in a building, the building owner's getting the exemption. Depending on how your lease is set up, you may or may not realize that savings. May not really help your business. So something to think about. But again, as we say, well, as long as I've been here, we as a board do not recommend we adopt classification, nor adopt the residential exemption or small commercial exemption, and hopefully maintain a message of fairness really for everybody. Everyone's treated the same in Northborough. So if I can answer any questions about any of those, certainly feel free to ask. Anybody?
Okay, thank you, Dan. I'll just note the board's in receipt of written communications from Mark Donahue, the chairman of the Industrial Development Commission, who requests that we preserve the single tax rate as a motivator to encourage economic development. And likewise, we are in receipt of a written communication from Quarter 495 Regional Chamber of Commerce. We have Karen Chapman here in the audience, the CEO, president. Also making the same case that a single tax rate is a more favorable thing to encourage development and businesses to locate in Northborough, and strongly advises that we continue with that policy. So, any questions by the board on this point? Leslie?
I don't have any questions. I want to thank John for his presentation, and also Dan for yours, and also the financial team. I know it's a lot of work getting to this point this time of year, and I know we've all heard this discussion, but my mind certainly has not changed this year versus all the other previous years. I think that I certainly wouldn't want to get into a bait-and-switch situation if we change the tax rate. I think we have a lot of small businesses that have come to town. There's movement with that. And I think it would be a very sad situation to say, guess what, we're all of a sudden going to have a dual tax rate. So I think that it also deters businesses from wanting to come here. So I think that what we're doing now works well, it's efficient, it's expected, and it's an attractive thing to have for Northborough as far as businesses, current businesses and attracting new.
Great. Anyone else? Julia?
I just have a question on the slide of new growth history with the bar graph, page 4. So it looks like 2020 was there was a larger than usual amount of personal property tax.
Right.
Is that evenly distributed amongst?
No, you may pick up some new accounts, or an existing business adds equipment. They might get rid of, we don't know, can't tell you exactly what it is. They might get rid of all their old servers and put up new servers. Or cell tower company comes in and they replace all the equipment on those towers. There's a lot of value there, but it's not necessarily new value, because they got rid of the old stuff. Again, as John was explaining earlier, personal property is different, and it doesn't work like a piece of real estate. So things are depreciating, things are being added on, there's new value in there, and then there's the existing values basically going down all the time, So that's kind of the net effect. So people are adding equipment or replacing equipment, and you're getting that net difference. So if you pick up a couple of items from something significant, well, that could boost that up 1 year. But the next year, it might just be flat. It might go on that way for years, You don't know from year to year what's going to happen unless, it's not like someone putting up a building and saying, hey, there's a giant warehouse on Martha Street now. We all know it's there. You don't know what's coming and going in every office, every business in town, And they report that every year on what we call forms of list, where requests for information we sent out every year, they have to file with us. And we take that information essentially and revalue those accounts every year. And that on top of the fact that businesses are coming and going too, So it's not just necessarily a new business coming to town, it's everything else going on in the background, So,
Okay, thank you, that was helpful.
okay, sure.
I'd just like to ask, going back to the first option, the split tax scenario
Sure.
between residential.
Yep.
I just wanted to make the clarification too there that when we're talking about doing that kind of split, we're talking about putting that extra burden not only on the larger commercial industrial properties, but also on the smaller ones.
Right.
And so it's got that other kind of conflicting impact on the
Right.
smaller businesses that you would like to encourage to remain vibrant. And so it's another argument against that, just
Sure.
simply from the. Any other questions, comments? No? Thank you. Thank you very much, Dan.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Is there any other information from staff? Does that conclude the presentation?
That concludes the presentation.
Okay. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on this matter? Very well, hearing none. Do I have a motion to close the hearing?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board vote to close the public hearing with the Board of Assessors for the purpose of discussing the valuation of each class of property, the minimum residential factor, and the allocation of the tax burden among the four classes of real property: residential, open space, commercial and industrial, and of personal property.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Hearing is closed. Do I have a motion for an action?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board vote to maintain a uniform tax rate for all classes of property at a factor of 1, to oppose the implementation of a residential exemption, and to oppose the implementation of a small commercial exemption.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, financial team, appreciate it. Thank you, Karen, for being here tonight. Yeah. It's now past the hour of 7:45 PM. We have a public hearing to consider an application for a new wine and malt package store license as submitted by VEDC LLC, doing business as Richdale Convenience for premises located at 5 West Main Street. The applicant is not here tonight. We have some paperwork and further background research that we're pursuing.
Yes, the police department has requested some additional time to complete the background, so
Okay.
the recommendation from staff tonight would be to open the public hearing. If there's certainly anybody here that wishes to speak on this, I would take that input and then continue the hearing till your December 16th meeting.
Okay, very well. I hereby declare the public hearing open. Is there anyone who wishes to speak on this particular application? There is none. So I guess I would like a motion to continue the hearing to December 16th, 2019, regular Selectmen's meeting.
Mr. Chair, I move that we continue the public hearing to December 16th.
Second.
Moved and seconded to a time of 7:05 PM.
To a time of 7:05 PM.
Moved and seconded, all in favor? Meeting is continued. Thank you. This brings us to reports. Julianne?
Yes, thank you. On Veterans Day, I attended the ceremony held at the Town Common. It was a very meaningful event with speakers and the Honor Guard paying tribute to the veterans and their families. We were reminded of the many sacrifices that veterans have made to ensure that we can enjoy the many freedoms that we have in this country. What struck me afterwards was the respectful silence that continued for several moments as people went over to the new monument and had time to reflect and think about the day and their loved ones. For that, I have to thank Scott Charpentier and the DPW staff for all of the work and thought that went into this project, as well as a thank you to the Town Common Committee for creating an area where we can honor our veterans in such a beautiful setting. And my second item of business is on November 13th, the White Cliffs Committee met, and I'm happy to report that work on the roof will begin soon and hopefully be done by the end of December. And I'd like to comment on something I brought up at the last meeting, which was to change the name of the Board of Selectmen to Members of Select Board, which would be in keeping with what many other towns are doing. I understand that we will be discussing that at a future meeting, and I just wanted to mention this as a follow-up. Also last week, I attended a presentation sponsored by CMRPC about solar farms and their effect on towns. Fortunately, two of our planning board members were there also, Carrie Martinek and Amy Paretsky. One of the most important themes of the presentation was that towns need to have bylaws in place so that developers and townspeople are clear about how these can be built. To that end, the planning board is already writing a proposed bylaw to be presented at town meeting. And lastly, I would just like to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Julianne. Leslie?
Okay. The first thing I wanted to ask, Chief Parenti, Fire Chief, the new ambulance was delivered?
Yeah.
And are you happy with it?
Yeah, it's pretty. It's white with red stripes.
Yes,
It's very nice.
yes.
Folks are really happy with it. As always, with any new vehicle that costs that much money, there's a punch list you end up getting. We found several items, and we've already contacted the, doesn't put it out of service, just several small items. And it's going to be heading back down to Greenwood, who is our salesman, which is in Attleboro, on the 2nd for the few things that need to be fixed, but otherwise very happy with it.
Okay. Happy with the features and improved features?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
it's, well, anyone who's seen it will see it's a much smaller truck than the older trucks. One of the things, so therefore it's a less expensive truck than the older trucks. It's a much more comfortable ride, which is what we're hearing from the medics who are in the back. And there's some new technology that we've built into this truck that we haven't had with the other trucks. Some iPads and our new our Med Vault, which used to be nothing but key controlled, is now code controlled that we can read with a Wi-Fi, and I can tell whenever anyone goes in it. So that gives us that much more of a level of security for the meds. So I'm very happy with that.
That's super. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's wonderful. I'm very happy about that. Also, I attended the Local Emergency Planning Committee meeting, LEPC, on November 14th, and I want to thank Chief and also Mike Borowitz for organizing that and speaking about the updated plan and just different things that go on with different companies. I'm always pleased to see all the representatives there from the various companies and a lot of the same faces. So there's a consistency with them as well. Seems like a lot of the larger companies seem to have some of the same people come in, and National Grid was there. It was always a very good meeting. So thank you very much for that. I wanted to remind people about the Toys for Tots, and that toys needed to be to the fire department lobby by December 10th. Thank you very much to residents who did contribute to that and will in the future. Also, I attended the Veterans Day lunch at the Senior Center, and I want to thank Vicki Colleen and Carolyn Harrington and their team for a fantastic meal. Everyone raves about it, and it really is a wonderful meal. They put so much time into it. Plenty of food for everyone, very nicely set up, very comfortable event for everybody there. And I wanted to thank the speakers, including John Coder, Kelly Burke, on the fact that it was covered by our cable station for viewing by residents. I think it's a wonderful event, a nice tribute to all of the veterans here. Veterans Day ceremony, attended that, and I want to thank Justin Souza, and I want to thank Jason for speaking. Very nice job. And the American Legion Honor Guard was there. Really, as always, they do a fantastic job. It was a nice day. The town common is beautiful, and again, I would like to thank Scott as well for all your work on that, the town common group, and all their work, and all the things that have happened within the landscapers and the people that came in to finish that up in time. It is just beautiful in there. And I know the Arsenals are very happy with what turned out as far as the plaque for Brian on that stone there. Very nicely done, so thank you very much for that. I've also been asked to announce that there's a Troop 101 wreath sale on Saturday, November 30th. And Northborough residents can sign up for home delivery between the hours of 9 and 1. The wreath will arrive. And wreath can also be picked up in person at Trinity Church, 23 Main Street, between 10 and 1. It's $12 per wreath, but they're always happy to accept donations. And all wreaths will include a bow that is made by the Northborough Girl Scouts. So it's a nice joint affair with those two groups. I think that's wonderful, and that fundraiser has been going on for years, and it's always top quality wreaths. They do a fantastic job with that. My last comment is about Kearney Park, and I'm going to keep bringing this up until I'm satisfied that it's improved. I'm getting additional complaints about that. I think it's on people's radar because we are talking about it. I have to reiterate again that this is not an off-leash dog park. And if there is a desire to have your dog off-leash, you need to go somewhere else. Because right now in Northborough, that is not happening. So we have resources here in town, but they can't spend all their time at Kearney Park. But I do want to find out what else we can do about it, because everything I see and hear says that people are kind of assuming that this is an off-leash park. Sort of this understanding that that's happening, and it's not correct. There is someone who I know who actually carries a knife with him because he's been approached by dogs. Shouldn't be approached by dogs on a trail that is supposed to be for dogs with leashes. And the owner of a dog may say, well, my dog's nice, my dog's friendly, but whoever is being approached doesn't necessarily know that. So I just want to keep this as a discussion point because I find it irritating that people are taking advantage of a park that was not meant for that purpose. So I will continue to bring this up, but I do want to know if there's something else that can be done. Can we have better signage there? I don't know. I really don't know what we can do about that. I know that we have talked about it and we want to have some resources devoted to it, but there are other things going on in town that need to be monitored as well. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them. So, thank you.
Thank you,
That's
Alyssa.
my report.
Tim?
I just have a couple questions. The first being, I know that the master plan committee is getting close to the end of their process. I was just wondering if we could get an update on what the next steps are with that process, how we're going to be involved, the other boards in town, how they may be involved, and what the next steps are for those. And then the second question, I know every year we're supposed to meet with Applefest to discuss parade days and all that. We usually do that in the fall, and I was just wondering if Applefest has been in contact with us, or if we need to reach out to Applefest to schedule those.
As far as the master plan is concerned, I was going to mention that in my report. I'll defer until that time. As far as Applefest, have we just not scheduled that yet?
Well, no, at the last meeting, the board took a vote to leave the parade and and the street fair and basically the schedule as is. So unless the board wants to come in and
I see.
revisit that issue, the decision was made at your last meeting that we were gonna leave it until it required additional discussion. So if based on the last parade, you feel it requires additional discussion, and then we'd have to reach out and schedule a meeting. Otherwise, the decision was made by the board that that was going to be
That was the schedule.
the schedule until revisited.
Okay.
So if the board would like me to schedule a meeting, I'm certainly happy to reach out to them.
I think perhaps not at the moment, or we can talk about it more, Tim,
Okay,
if you'd like.
perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You all set?
Yep.
Okay. Dawn?
No, and I'd just like to piggyback on what Julianne had to say and Leslie had to say about both Veterans Day celebrations. And thanks, Scott, for all his work downtown and everybody that was involved one way or the other with both ceremonies. They were both lovely occasions, so thank you, and thank the veterans again one more time. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dawn. Bring my notes up here. I would first like to start by noting the tragic passing of Fire Lieutenant Jason Menard of the Worcester, one of the Worcester Fire Departments. They were called to a blaze last week, Wednesday, I believe it was, and in attempting to search the building to ensure that nobody was still in there, he heroically saved the lives of two of his fellow firefighters, but he himself was trapped in the building and did not survive. So if I could, Chief Parenti, if you have any brief words you'd like to offer on this topic.
It's, whenever we have a line of duty death, it's a very emotional, for everyone in the fire service. We consider ourselves a family. We consider them brothers and sisters, and it always has a big impact on us. And one of the things we did today, actually, is I gave the guys some time. We came up and we turned on the TV, and we were watching part of the services, and we started having a discussion. We always like to say that the kitchen table and a fire station is where all the problems in the world are solved. You know, it's just what we do. We sit around and we talk. And what we did is we used it as a, I would say, teachable moment. But we started discussing, well, could that happen here? And the answer is yes, it can happen here. And if it does happen here, how are we going to handle it? What are we going to do? And I don't mean the line of duty death, but the incident itself. You know, are we going to commit people? Would we commit people? Well, if we had a report of a child trapped, I can tell you right now, I couldn't hold the guys out, let alone make a decision to not commit them. And it just, it's very tragic, and I can tell you, if I can make one comment, and you see all these news reports, and you see everyone says, we're so proud of our firefighters, and we're so, you know, it's terrible and what they do, and this happens with police when it's a line of duty death, and don't let it be just now that you think about that. Just remember, these guys are out there, these men and women are out there 24/7, 365, doing the same job. Thankfully, this is a rare incident. But don't let it just be when something like this happens that you realize what these men and women are out there doing. And both police, fire, EMS, all of us, and even I want to include DPW in that, because I got to tell you, a lot of the stuff we do, they're out there right with us, helping us and helping PD along. So just keep that in mind.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. I'd also like to just mention briefly my thanks for the Veterans Day observance on Monday, November 11th. I'd like to thank Director of Veteran Services Justin Souza for organizing the members of American Legion Post 234, including the Honor Guard led by Bruce Goldsmith. Jerry Bork spoke eloquently about some background and history concerning the Civil War. And I just also like to thank the members of the public who are in attendance. It's the middle of a Monday morning, and just very much appreciate their presence there. Thanks to the Town Common Committee for their efforts to bring that site into something that can be a public assembly area, and also to the DPW department for the fantastic job on the Town Common overall and the new memorial area. I think everyone, it's probably the first and closest look they've had for it, and it's very, very impressive, and certainly is a very beautiful spot in the middle of the town. So, the Master Plan Steering Committee, Tim, to your question. met last Wednesday night, November 13th. This was essentially the final meeting of the committee to review the full report produced by our consultant, VHB. We went through, did some relatively minor editing to feed that back to the consultant. The next major event is going to be on December 10th, Tuesday night, which is going to be the planning board's meeting and public hearing, presentation of the master plan at the town library at 7 p.m., I believe. The master plan steering committee will be in attendance to do most of the presentation. The planning board will conduct a public hearing to hear any comments from the public. And then I believe from that point forward, the planning board has a process to review and approve or accept the master plan. The recommendation of the committee at this point is that subsequent to that, the Board of Selectmen would be asked to create an implementation committee, which would be similar probably in composition, not identical to, and maybe not as large, but similar in composition to the master plan steering committee, which would provide a cross-section of representation of different boards, different interests, and begin to look at the plan's implementation section, which kind of lays out kind of a priority and timeline, short, medium, and long term for some of the items in the plan, and begin to put together some more detailed plans and a timeline for beginning to execute on those projects. That will necessarily involve the participation of our finance committees, appropriations, and financial planning for any larger projects that might arise from that, and the funding that's required to incorporate some of that into the capital plan. So the timeline isn't definite yet, but I would encourage everyone to attend the public hearing on December 10th, Tuesday, and that will essentially be the opportunity for the public to hear all of the details of the plan, the goals, recommendations, and implementation process that will follow from there. So let's see, what else do I have? I want to congratulate the Algonquin Regional High School girls soccer team. They are the Central Mass champions. They won a dramatic 2-1 game. It was actually tied 1-1 after regulation. They played a scoreless overtime, and then they won 3-1 on penalty kicks. So they advanced to the state semifinals. That will be played tomorrow night, I understand, at 5 p.m. at Springfield Central High School. As I mentioned in a previous meeting, this is Coach Scott Taggart, the girls' soccer team coach. This is he had announced at the beginning of the season this would be his last, and the girls have kind of sent him out on a high note with a Central Mass championship, and we'll see what more they can tack on to that. I did ask, if possible, that they could just, close things out in regulation rather than go into overtime or penalty kicks or something. Make it easier on us spectators. And then finally, just to wish everyone a happy and safe Thanksgiving. Enjoy the time with your family and friends, and also be mindful of those less fortunate. And that concludes my report. John?
Just one thing I want to mention, to please hold the date, December 12th at 7 p.m. at the library. That is going to be the date for the annual financial trend monitoring presentation. As you know, this is the annual meeting between the Board of Selectmen, Financial Planning Committee, Appropriations Committee, and the K-8 School Committee. And essentially, it's the start of setting the table for the fiscal 21 budget process. And I've had people say, well, why wait till December? And we really can't do it any sooner because we have to close out with the auditors. We have to close out the books to fiscal 19, get our free cash certified, which just happened last month. And we have to set the tax rate, which finalizes our fiscal 20 budget, which you just did this evening. And it's that data point for fiscal 20 that's the starting point for all of the analysis and the look forward. So, but again, I view this as probably one of the most valuable meetings outside of town meeting that we do each year. And I think it has, it's helped a lot to get everybody on these key boards and committees on the same page with the same information. And allows us to move confidently in a direction. So I appreciate, we did send a reminder out, but just want to make sure that everybody has that in their calendar. And this year, Will not be the full presentation. We try to do that every other year, unless we have a lot of new folks. This year, it's going to be more of an update. We're going to just really focus on a couple of key indicators. And as I sort of telegraphed tonight, one is going to be, new growth and economic development will be one of the areas that we're going to spend a little bit of time on. Have some additional maps so everybody has a good understanding of that development piece. So please hold the date. That's all I have.
Great, thank you, John. Any public comments? Chief Parenti.
Yeah, I just want to mention, take advantage of the television and to mention to people here that Thanksgiving coming up, we're all wishing everyone a happy Thanksgiving. Keep in mind, we had a ton of fires on Thanksgiving from cooking across the Commonwealth. People deep frying turkeys, people in their garages or in their basements, or people just cooking and having grease spill out. So just please, we love our citizens, we love to meet them, we don't want to meet you on Thanksgiving Day. So just use some great care, that's all we ask.
Thank you very much, Chief. Any other comments? No. Okay, new business. We have interview subcommittee, recommendation for appointments to the Historic District Commission, Community Preservation Committee, and the Community Affairs Committee.
Mr. Chair, I move the board vote to appoint Brian Swanson as an alternate member on the Historic District Commission for a partial 2-year term to expire on April 30th, 2021, as recommended by the interview subcommittee.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Great. Thank you.
I move the board vote to appoint Jeffrey Leland to the Community Preservation Committee for a partial 2-year term to expire on April 30th, 2021, as recommended by the interview subcommittee.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
I move the board vote to appoint Beth Payne to the Community Affairs Committee for a partial 1-year term to expire on April 30th, 2020, as recommended by the interview subcommittee.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Great. We congratulate all those citizens for stepping up to fill some of these vacancies. We appreciate their help and look forward to their participation and contributions. Next, authorization of December 7, 2019 holiday trolley operation and proposed trolley stop locations. The members of the holiday trolley operation were unable to be here tonight, but they have asked that the board, as we've done in the past, make the approvals to run the holiday trolley. It will be held on December 7th, 2019, 11:30 to 5:30. And this is an event we have each year where the trolley will operate through town, stopping off at various shops and everything along the town, and providing an opportunity for people to visit some of these shops and have an enjoyable time during that day. Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I move the board vote to authorize the operation of the holiday trolley on Saturday, December 7th, 2019, from 11:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., and to authorize the proposed trolley stop locations as presented on the holiday trolley flyer.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And likewise, the Community Affairs Committee asked that the board close Blake Street during the tree lighting ceremony at the Neil Ellsworth Evergreen Tree. Again, this is December 7th, 2019, Saturday, from 5 to 6 p.m. Typically, this is an opportunity where people in town will gather. There's a number of events. We have pizza, cookies, and hot chocolate. We have the tree lighting ceremony at 5:20 p.m. 5:30, holiday carols by a children's chorus, and 6 p.m., the holiday trolley raffle drawing. I would like to thank Northborough House of Pizza for donating the pizza. The donations made will, monetary donations provided by people will go to Northborough Food Pantry. I also thank Metro West Painting for donating cookies and hot chocolate. We have Anthony Andrew Jewelers, Anthony Joseph Real Estate, Avidia Bank, Lorna Helms Realtor, and Jacob Stein Cosmetic and Family Dentistry as sponsors for the event. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move the board vote to close Blake Street on Saturday, December 7th, 2019, from 4:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. for the tree lighting ceremony.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Have approval and execution of plowing and treatment agreements for private ways for the 2019-2020 winter season.
Mr. Chair, I move the board vote to approve and execute the plowing and treatment agreements for the 2019-2020 winter season for Harris Avenue and Maple Lane.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Great. And set the meeting schedule, Board of Selectmen's meeting schedule for January through April 2020. John?
So we typically set our meeting at least on a quarterly basis. At this point in time, there are no conflicts for the upcoming meeting schedule, so we'd be regularly scheduled meetings for January 13th, January 27th, February 10th, and February 24th, March 9th, March 23rd, April 13th, and I can't believe I'm looking at a schedule that says this, but town meeting on April 27th.
Thank you very much, John. I'll note from the February and March dates that 2020 is a leap year. Any discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I move the board vote to set the meeting schedule for January through April as follows: January 13th, January 27th, February 10th, February 24th, March 9th, March 23rd, April 13th, and April 27th for town meeting.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Next item, consider closing town offices, DPW, and senior center on Tuesday, December 24th at 12 noon. John?
So as is tradition, the board typically takes up consideration of closing town offices, the senior center and the library, just at noon on Christmas Eve to allow our employees to spend a little more time with their families. This is particularly, I think, a key day since it's falling on a Tuesday, which is the night that we are open late. Again, this is just for consideration of the board. There's no requirement that you do this, but I did want to place it on the agenda for your consideration this evening.
Thank you, John. I have no objection. The fact that it comes on a Tuesday, which is typically our evening hours, I don't anticipate many people will be coming to Town Hall on Christmas Eve to pursue any town business they may have. So, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move the board vote to close the town offices, DPW, and senior center on Tuesday, December 24th, 2019, at 12 noon to provide staff additional time with their families this holiday season. Staff who are normally scheduled to work this day shall receive their regular rate of pay. In the event that essential staff are called in to work, they shall receive their regular rate of pay. Staff not scheduled to work this day, including staff on scheduled vacation leave or sick leave, shall have such scheduled leave calculated on a full-time basis.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much on behalf of the staff. That's very generous.
Happy to do it. Any other business to come before the board?
No other business this evening.
No other business. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chair, move we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Great. Thank you all very much. Have a very nice Thanksgiving.